Hello. There are many phrases or reference to certain things in Chinese poetry, which has become universally accepted symbols or metaphors to refer to something else. This is true in many other languages or cultures. For example, whatever culture we are from, when we talk about the sun, we would associate it with something or someone majestic or powerful. When we talk about cold wind, it would be something bitter or miserable. But every culture probably has its own unique such references. For example, last week we saw the reference to river maple, Jiangfeng, and we said that this reference was rooted in very ancient Chinese poetry and almost always refers to a sad feeling. Today, we will look at another example. It's the willow tree, Liu, or Yang Liu. If you go through any Chinese poetry books, you will see many poems with such a reference. Whenever you see this, it's almost guaranteed that it's a reference to some missing thoughts, either missing home when you are far away or missing friends when saying goodbye. Why is that? Because this liu, willow tree, has a similar pronunciation of another Chinese character, liu, which means to stay, to keep. So the ancient Chinese borrowed willow trees to show their feeling of not willing to leave or letting people go away. And if you remember that a willow tree, what does it look like? It's long, dropping, and the soft branches, when swaying in the spring, are almost like begging people to stay. It had so evolved in these ancient days that when people parted, they would pick a tender branch from a willow tree and give it to each other to show their everlasting friendship or love. Usually, it would be in the spring, and we could imagine the setting would be warm and pretty. Such a custom, although long gone, has been kept in poetry, often reminding us, or even making us envious, how romantic and poetic these ancient people were. Another point that I need to add is sometimes you will see Yang Liu in these poems, not just Liu. Although Yang is also a type of tree, Yang Shu, the poplar tree. When you see Yang Liu together, it doesn't mean poplar and willow. It just means the willow tree, nothing to do with the poplar. The poem we are looking at today is Liangzhou Ci by Wang Zhihuan. We are now back to the prime Tang era. Wang Zhihuan was roughly 12 years older than Li Bai. We've learned his 登鹳雀楼, the famous line, 欲穷千里目，更上一层楼. Today we are going to learn another of his masterpieces, 凉州词. We've seen one poem with the same title before, if you remember, the same 凉州词 by Wang Han. 葡萄美酒夜光杯，欲饮琵琶马上催。醉卧沙场君莫笑，古来征战几人回。We said that Liangzhou was an old geographical area in the far west of the Tang Empire, often a battlefield with neighboring powers or tribes. And 词 means words, but here can be vaguely interpreted as a song or a poem. Let's read this poem together first. 黄河远上白云间，一片孤城万仞山。羌笛何须怨杨柳，春风不度玉门关。黄河 is a yellow river. 远 is far. 上 is high up. 白云 white cloud. 间 in the middle. All very straightforward. This is typical of the way poets wrote from this prime Tang era, what we call 盛唐. It's a style of outlining some big scenes with the simplest language, right to the point, but creating a majestic and heroic atmosphere. Remember the same poet 登鹳雀楼? He wrote 黄河入海流. The yellow river goes into the sea. also extremely simple and effective. So this first line is basically saying the Yellow River comes from far and high up, actually so high up in the mountain that it's in the white clouds. We often say usually the opening line would set the tone for the whole poem, like last time we say 月落乌啼霜满天 would immediately bring the mood of something sad and heavy. Here, these 7 characters depict something open, wide, and grand. It has to be so, because this would be about things or people in Liangzhou, the battlefield at the frontier of the empire. The setting has to be big and heroic. What else can you see in this setting? 一片孤城万仞山. 片 is swathe. So 一片 means a swathe of something. For example, 一片土地, a swathe of land, or 一片森林, a swathe of forest. Here, it is a swathe of 孤城. 孤 is lone or alone, lonely. 城 is city. So you can also see a swathe of a lone city. Why lone? Because it was near the frontier and very barren, and probably with deserts around. Economy was not that advanced, and there wouldn't be a lot of people there. The poet used 一片, not just a city, like 一座孤城, because 片 has that flattened feel, as we say 一片树叶, a piece of leaf, 一片冰, a piece of ice. The things being described is often flat and thin. So 一片孤城 was implying that the city was kind of flat, i.e., it was not highly concentrated with many tall buildings or temples, etc., possibly only with many small houses scattered around, indirectly suggesting that this city was not very lively and vibrant, and therefore is a 孤城, being lone and lonely. What is next to this 孤城? It's 万仞山. Ren is a very vague measurement unit in ancient Chinese, roughly equaling a couple of meters. 万仞 is 10,000 ren. We should know this already, that it's an exaggeration to say the mountain was really high, as we have seen so many times before. So together, these 2 lines show us the river, the mountains, the cloud, and the lone city. We almost feel we are standing at a vantage point, looking into the far distance, and has this grand and majestic view in front of our eyes. The next line, as expected, will and should change to a different angle. And typically, what would you write? After you write about a marvelous sight, it could be about hearing. Just like last week, after describing the dark night, the maple tree, and the lamp on a fishing boat, the poet Zhang Ji wrote about the sounds of bells from Hanshan Si. Here, Wang Zhihuan heard some flute music. Di is flute. Qiang is an ambiguous reference to certain foreign tribes at that time. Similarly, we have this Hu reference, which also means something foreign, as in Wang Changling's poem, 不教胡马度阴山. So, qiang di means some foreign flute. Because Liangzhou was at the frontier of the empire, there were a lot of foreign influence, including the music or musical instruments. But what music were the flute playing? It was not music from this foreign land, but something to do with Yangliu. Yuan is to grudge and be bitter about. So this qiang di, the flute people were playing, was grudging about Yangliu. We explained earlier the real meaning of Yangliu. Here is a reference had a double-layered meaning. First, it seems that the flute was playing some sad music while grudging about the fact that those willow trees hadn't turned green yet. This wasn't explicitly written, But this interpretation fit the scene and the logic well, and that's how we understand it. Second, in fact, there was a popular tune at the time titled 折杨柳. To pick a willow branch. Obviously, the tune was about missing thoughts, so whenever you play the music or hear it, even without seeing the actual willow, the same kind of emotions would grow. So here Yang Liu also cleverly refers to this music piece, and there is a grudging feeling in it. Why? Because these people, or soldiers, had to stay at the frontiers and not able to get back home. But the poet said, 何须? 须 is necessary, need to, and the 何 is why or how. Why is it necessary, or how is it necessary for you to bear this ill resentment? This is a rhetorical question, actually meaning it's not necessary for you to be bitter about this at all. Why? The answer is in the last line, determined and powerful. 春风不度玉门关. 春风 is a spring breeze. 度 is to pass, to arrive at. 不 is not. We've seen this 关 before, again in Wang Changling's poems. 秦时明月汉时关. 关 means a mountain pass or some fortress. 玉门, literally Jade Gate, is the name of a place. And the 玉门关 or 玉门 Pass is somewhere between the central area of Tang Empire and its west frontiers. So west of 玉门关 was where the deserted and desolate lands are. Why do these people play the music of 折杨柳? The music of missing homeland? Obviously, because the music would offer some comfort and hope, because somehow these people may still hope the spring might come, and somehow they could return home. And perhaps the sight of the spring, the green burgeoning trees, would offer some comfort to these people with harsh lives, both physically and spiritually. Here, the spring is a reference to the real spring season, and also, metaphorically, to something warm and hopeful. But was it realistic? Not at all, because 春风不度玉门关. The frontiers were so far away that spring would never reach there, and those hopes would be all in vain in the end. This is so tragic. These people or soldiers will still need to be based there for a long time, and all the hope with the music intended to offer certain comfort would inevitably bring more disappointment. That's why he said, 羌笛何须怨杨柳? You shouldn't. In the poet's eyes, these soldiers were really courageous and commendable. They had sacrificed so much by staying in the foreign land for so long, but had so little to comfort them or to compensate them. In a very subtle way, the poet actually showed his sympathy and quiet admiration to these people, all delivered through big picture and daring languages, which again is the typical style of the prime Tang, that he almost always had that element of positiveness or heroism, even under very harsh and adverse circumstances. That's all for today. Thank you very much.